Good news you can use with that Mahone, yeah. She got the good news you can use. Good news you can use for your life.
Hello again, and welcome to this edition of the Boomer Beat, where we are having a conversation about racism in America. Joining me is a panel from across the country who will share their thoughts about the Derek Chauvin trial this week and other police-related shootings. So we are going to start with the introductions here with Jeb.
Hi, my name is Jeb Buffington. I live in Brevard, North Carolina, up in the mountains, and formerly of Paris, France, now back in the U.S.
Gary?
Hi, my name is Gary Jones. I live in Philadelphia, PA, formerly from North Carolina.
Brooks?
Good morning, aloha kako. My name is Brooks Bays. I live in Honolulu for the last 40 years, but I'm from Texas originally.
Steve?
Steve from Ohio, Canton, Ohio, Football Hall of Fame city. I'm glad to be here.
Michael?
I'm Michael Hall. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm glad to be here as well.
Osha?
Osha Davidson, and I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm very, very happy to be with you.
And last but not least, and holding it down for the ladies today, is
Gary, where are you? He's supposed to be introducing himself. Hi, I'm Kathy Bear. I think I've been with most of you, but it's been a while. I'm also from Canton, Ohio, Pro Football Hall of Fame. Hit McKinley. Go Bulldogs.
Awesome. Go Pups.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here's Jerry. Oh,
did he fall in the pond? Okay.
No, I'm using this weird background. Hold on. I'm putting it back to the normal background. How's that?
Okay, great.
Me into the pond.
As soon as I figure it out.
Okay. And so would you introduce yourself, Jerry?
Jerry.
Yeah, Jerry. Yeah, I am originally from Lakewood, New Jersey. Grew up there in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Went to Denver for many years, lived there. Then I moved to Pittsburgh with a company that brought me there for cable TV. Then I went into my own company, this and that, and ended up finding Kathy in Ohio. So
on Match.
Oh my God.
Okay, well, listen, this is not a plug for Match, okay? So let us not.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's where we met.
That's awesome.
About 9 months ago.
That's awesome.
Okay, well, I said last but not least, but here's another man showing up.
No, and Beverly, I have been wanting Jerry to meet you and the gang for a long time because I talk about this all the time.
Well, I'm very glad to meet you. Thank you, Jerry.
Nice to meet everybody.
All right, and really last but not least is
Bruce.
Okay, Bruce, introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Didn't know if I was going to make it, but I made it here. Bruce Dunn, Daytona Beach, Florida.
Awesome.
Teacher and associate director for ESPN.
All right, very good. All right, let's just jump right into it here, guys, because as you know, the verdict did come in the Derek Chauvin trial. He was guilty on all 3 counts. Now, my first question is, was anybody surprised by the verdict? And if you were surprised, what surprised you? Osha, you said you were surprised. What surprised you?
I was surprised that he was convicted at all. That was my first reaction, was shock. I did not expect a conviction. It's so rare. And I know we'll talk more about our reactions later, but just the fact, I was completely preparing for the worst the entire time. I was just completely stunned.
Okay, let me ask you this. So, because I saw someone try to compare the O.J. Simpson trial to this trial, and they were like waited with bated breath, trying to, like they were so nervous because they didn't know what the shakeout was going to be. Were you feeling that way?
I wasn't thinking about that too much. No, I was more concentrating on whether Derek Chauvin would be held accountable, and whether I was focusing on the idea that it was possible for a white cop to be convicted of murdering a black man under any circumstances, let alone, I mean, I know there are these overwhelming things of this video, the murder being committed, being filmed on video, all these expert witnesses, all these cops, including the chief of police, saying, yes, this was murder. I didn't think that was going to have any effect on the jury's decision. And so after my first shock, it was more a sense of, wow, so it took all of those things to convict a white cop of murder of a black man. So short of all of that, is there any chance? And I hear pundits discussing this, saying, well, what may this mean for police reform? We have no idea what it may mean. People can discuss it all they want, but it wasn't just all that overwhelming evidence. It was the fact that there were protests all across the nation for weeks and months and across the world.
During a pandemic.
During a pandemic. So to me, okay, police reform, will this result in police reform? Well, that depends entirely on what we all do now. If we demand that, if we continue to keep up the pressure. And if we don't, I have once again, no confidence that anything will change.
Was anyone else surprised by the verdict? Okay, Bruce?
I was more surprised because like Osha, I just didn't think it was going to happen. And like many have said, this was accountability, not justice. Because justice would have been both people being alive and then seeing that verdict comes down. But I think this was more a verdict on accountability, which no one could deny. And based on the evidence, it was about accountability for the actions, and based on the testimony that was being brought forth about that was not policy. It was more of about accountability. So to me, it's still not justice yet, but it was accountability. So it's a step in the right direction. Will things change? That's a question still to be answered in light of the additional shootings, killings, and things that have happened prior to that verdict and now after the verdict.
Right, and we're going to get into that. So hold that thought there. Mike, you said you were surprised as well?
Well, I was surprised because based on what I've seen in the past, I was reluctant that they would come back with that. I felt that with the jury that they had, that there was going to be some accountability. I just didn't think all three of them would be guilty. So now, I was looking more for maybe one, and then they were going to toss the others. But when they came back with three, I felt that battle was won, but the war is definitely not over.
Right. Now, you brought up the makeup of the jury, which I wanted to talk about briefly. So there were 6 whites on the jury, 4 blacks. There were 7 women and 5 men. And there were 2 biracial who declared themselves as biracial. Now, I'm going to ask you this, Kathy. Well, she just kind of popped out here, but I'm going to ask you this, Kathy. Do you think that a woman's influence played a role in the jury? I mean, women, they say women tend to be more compassionate. more understanding. So I think seeing that video over and over again could have been influential. What are your thoughts about that?
Men and women do think differently. There's no doubt about it. But to me, seeing that evidence and watching that video over and over again, he was guilty. I mean, I don't know how any other outcome could occur, except that this is the first time, I believe, in history that a black man, a white cop, was convicted of murder. No?
No. In South Carolina, they convicted him, not of murder, of manslaughter, but they did convict. Yeah, you're right. But they convicted him of manslaughter, not of murder.
I think I heard that through this whole thing. But regardless, you know, I do think women think differently, but I'm not so sure in this instance that it mattered. I think to me, the minute I saw that video, I'm like, this guy killed this man, period. No doubt about it in my mind. There was no compassion for this cop. That I had, all my compassion was for George Floyd and his family, period. And that's the reason I'm here today, is because of what happened.
All right.
I cried, you know, so anyway.
Was anyone else surprised at all? I mean, Jeb or Gary? Were you surprised, Gary?
I wasn't surprised at the verdict. I mean, I think it was clear that he was guilty, but there was that apprehension. So the apprehension of whether or not he would be convicted. So I don't know if I can say surprised, but there was that, you know, kind of on edge feeling. It was clear. This guy he killed Mr. Floyd. It was clear. But how many times have we been in this position before, where some things seemed to be clear and then it went the other direction? So in terms of just like, you know, I had a chance like to watch good parts of the trial here and there throughout the day. It was very clear, but I just wasn't sure. So when I heard the verdict guilty, I was like, okay, yeah, that's what it should have been. I was preparing myself for it not to be guilty, you know, but guilty made sense.
All right. I know you've got something, Bruce, but I'm going to jump into Jeb and then I'll come back to you. Go ahead, Jeb.
Yeah, I forget it was Michael or Gary. Someone mentioned they thought that he might get found guilty on one of the lesser charges. I thought historically that's where it would probably go, but in terms of the actual evidence for this case, the evidence was so overwhelming that if there was ever going to be justice given to a black victim, this had to be the case given in the video. So I was, can't say you're happy with a verdict like that, but justice was done with all, you know, found guilty on those 3 counts.
Okay, well, I'm going to beg to differ slightly because, you know, Walter Scott was shot like, I don't know how many times in the back as he was running away from police. There should have been justice served. And then you've got Philando Castile, who was sitting in his car for lawfully carrying a weapon. The cops weren't charged or found guilty there. So, yeah, maybe this was a case to kind of shine the light, but there have been so many others, and how many were never caught on camera. Go ahead, Bruce. You said you wanted to say something, and Jerry, I see you over there, so I'm going to come to you after Bruce.
Just something real quick. Had it not been for video, that would have never happened.
I agree. Exactly.
No video never would have happened, and that's the only thing that's changing these potential verdicts and the things that are coming down the line. If there's no video, it's not going to happen, and we've got the whole thing that's going on right now in Columbus with not releasing the video.
Right. Well, we've got the same situation in North Carolina too. We're going to get to all of this. All right, Jerry, you want to jump in here?
I just think you know, I think the Foster family brought this up after the verdict, and the fact that the reason, a strong reason we got a guilty verdict was the fact that this was kept in the national public media for a whole year. I mean, with all the demonstrations that were done, I mean, this was unlike any other trial. Okay, this was kept. And I think the national media, and that's why you're starting seeing pushback from the Republicans now, coming back and saying, hold on, we don't want to do any more demonstrations. We're going to do those against the law, because they saw that the outcome, once you go national, then you get a guilty verdict. And I think that was critical in this case,
Okay,
in comparison to many other cases.
Okay, thanks. Steve, you want to chime in?
I agree with what Jerry said and what OSHA said. It took an entire world to convict him. Think about that. An entire world. Had there not been the video, no conviction. Had there not been the rest of the world saying this is horrible, no conviction, even with the video. And so for that reason, I'm a bit cynical that, where this goes next, because if we need all of that to convict one white cop for murdering a black person, how is that even possible? I mean, it was one of those moments where everything came together. But the real enemy is not Chauvin. The enemy is the system itself. This is the first time we have seen the blue wall crack and all of the infrastructure that supports the blue wall crack. And that's what we got to get to. Otherwise, we will always need a year of protests, the best video, the best prosecution, the best whatever networks behind this to convict one person of something that is so obvious.
Well, I think
that
the only thing that gave me hope in all this was that this was such a different act of murder from a cop pulling out their gun in the heat of the moment and bang, bang, bang. This was a man with his knee on a neck for 9 minutes. It was methodical. Yes. It wasn't premeditated. He didn't decide in advance, I'm going to do this. But once he started, he sat there, he kneeled there, minute after minute after minute after minute after minute after minute. And that was on tape. And there was no denying, there was no defense that it was, he had to make a snap decision. His life was in danger. All these excuses that they keep using and will continue to use, they could not use in this case. So there were 2 recent shootings in Honolulu. They're using in the heat of the moment, in the snap decision, it was dark, whatever kind of thing. But because this was so methodical, that tips it into a whole different set of arguments. There was no way they could come back. But I still had no faith that they would convict him.
Kathy, you had something you wanted to say?
Nobody said this. If that young lady had not recorded this on her phone, we probably would not have had a conviction. If she had not stood there and as a witness with a video that went viral. That's all I want to say.
But so, if I could counter and say this, even though she had the video, had there not been, as OSHA said, an entire world revolting, even with the video, he would not have been convicted. We forget about the gentleman in New York that was choked on national TV. Right, with loose cigarettes. They never even asked for trial. They never even went to trial on that. And there was clear video. I watched it drinking morning coffee on MSNBC. Took an entire world to say that's too far. The video wouldn't have been enough alone. And that's the problem. That justice takes such a monumental effort to convict, to crack the blue wall.
Yeah.
I know, no, seriously. I mean, because here's the thing. Black people go into the courtroom and a jury of their peers are selected. And there are so many instances where the majority or all of those jurors are white. So if the tables were flipped and you got an all-black jury, would that be considered a jury of your peers?
What's my crime? If I were accused of killing a black person, then that brings race right into the front of it. But other than that, and maybe even in that case, no, I wouldn't have a problem with an all-black jury. It's yeah, no, that's
Okay.
I don't.
How about
I would like my defense to do a good job in vetting those people, regardless of their race. But no, an all-black jury is not a problem.
all right, Jerry, Kathy, what are your thoughts?
But
Unmute
I
yourself.
think it depends on the crime, but I think really it's up to your attorneys. I think the attorneys that's probably the biggest thing that you can get for your attorney, is to make sure that that jury pool represents you the best and is the fairest. And if the attorneys get to the point where they don't, select a jury, that is fair-minded, then you're going to have a verdict that's not fair. And that's the way the system works, for right or for wrong.
You feel that way, Kathy?
No. Go ahead.
Okay.
No, honestly, I would want the jury to be like Derek Chauvin's. I would want it to be fairly equal, or a mix of people would be better. I would feel it was more fair that way, to have a variety of my peers.
Okay, Brooks, now you live in Hawaii, so it's a little different over there. So you would have a
I
lot
was
of
going to say there would be not a random sample of the
Yeah,
population.
you have
It would
a
scrape up
lot
that many
of
black people.
names over
But it
there.
could easily be, I could easily have a jury of all East Asian people.
That's
or
right.
And
Would
I would feel completely comfortable with that. I think the terminology your peers is kind of, it comes from doesn't it come from Old English law, where they're promising members of the peerage, don't worry, honey, if you have a jury, they're all going to be of your class. So so the terminology doesn't really apply in America as much, although class is a huge issue here. But no, I would feel perfectly comfortable.
Okay. All right. So Chauvin is scheduled to be sentenced June 16th. And he could get the minimum 12.5 years, or he could get the maximum 40 years. What do you think? How do you think the judge is going to go with that? I mean, we all think he should probably get 40 years, but what are your thoughts? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Bruce?
No.
He's going to get the minimum.
You think so? Okay.
Yeah. Police officer, first time, sending a message, letting folks know and letting other police officers know, we will be watching, but we're not going to be one extreme to the next. So if a second thing happens after the sentencing, similar to that, then that person would get the max because they didn't learn from the first time.
Oh, okay. Osha, did you want to say something there?
I hadn't really had any thoughts about it, but what you were just saying about the first time, I think you're referring to first time offender Derek Chauvin. But what gets me every time when I hear that, when they're making that point earlier during the trial, he had 20, I believe it was 22 charges, formal charges. People brought complaints,
Yes.
filed complaints at great risk to themselves to do that, of violence. So this was a first time prosecution, which is a very different thing. But I don't have any particular idea of how many years is fitting. The American judicial system is kind of out of whack on sentencing, not just by race, but by crimes. And that's racially tinged as well. But
So was he represented by a jury of his peers? Because I always debate that issue. I always say, well, what does that really mean? A jury of your peers? Does that mean they should have all been police officers? Should they all have been male? Should they all have been a certain age? Should they all have been white? What is a jury of your peers? And was he really represented by a jury of his peers?
Good point.
Question. Anybody want to respond to it?
It's American citizens are a jury of your peers. That's my point of view. And I know that's a broad brush.
The makeup of your community, whatever that community is where the trial is being held, if you live in that community or in that jurisdiction, that's the makeup of your peers. So as long as they had the representation that they had, that was considered a jury of your peers.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I think because when they pick juries and defense and the prosecution have a broad a scope to get rid of jurors, I think that's wrong. I mean, I think it's terrible that you can pretty much pick a jury that you want. A good lawyer can pick a jury that he wants. And I think that needs to be addressed. That I agree. What are your peers? And how is it that you can pick a jury and because someone feels a certain way, you can get rid of that person. They can go. And each one of them was asked about how they felt about police brutality. And anyone that had any kind of feelings about police brutality, they got off that jury. So to screen those people, to include those 4 Black people, and one of them was a foreigner. I won't call him a foreigner. I don't want to do that. One of them came from another country, and I have no problem with that. But to screen them down to the point where none of them can say that I felt that was wrong or I don't agree with police brutality. I don't agree with police brutality. They were all screened and let go.
Okay, let me have Jeb and then OSHA jump in here.
Yeah, just
Jeb.
I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea of narrowing this vision of peers too much. Imagine back in the 60s when you had civil rights cases in the South, what you wouldn't want is a bunch of white local people on the jury. You'd want a broader mix. So what Stephen said in the beginning is absolutely correct. The peer is supposed to be other American citizens that understand your rights, but that aren't so close to the community where they could be swayed by living with the same values as the perp, as the accused person. You want to broaden that out.
OSHA?
I might be wrong about this. I'm not a lawyer, but I believe each side, the defense and the prosecution, has a certain number of strikes that they could use to prohibit someone from being on the jury, but that's not endless. And so what they focus on is finding the least objectionable people that both sides will agree on being a jury of their peers. And to me, yes, I do think it was a jury of his peers, because just like everyone else was saying, that it is a broad brush, and it should be. But the fact that there are a specific number of strikes that each side gets to get rid of a jury that they feel is prejudicial or too close to one or the other, that seems to be working better now, but I don't have any real insight into the specifics of that, any data.
Well, let me ask this question because I'm just curious. We know that it would never happen, but I'm just curious, and I'm going to ask the white panelists. If you were in a courtroom for whatever situation, you're a defendant, and you got an all-Black jury, is that a jury of your peers? What are your thoughts?
Perspective to this, there was a Black officer I believe in Minnesota,
Yeah.
who by accident, he was startled by the woman that called, the white woman that actually called the police. He turned, it was at night, he turned, fired, and killed her. Okay. He was with his partner. They were in a back alley. He heard a noise, he got startled, he turned and killed her. It looked more like an accident. He was convicted of manslaughter, I believe, and 15 years. Whereas Chauvin, this is a depraved indifference, in my opinion, murder. So we'll see if he gets 15 years or more. My concern is that just like it took the whole world to convict him, it's going to take the whole world to get him an appropriate sentence. I'm very concerned that we'll once again see that the scales of justice are imbalanced. He might just get the 12 years. But I think that an accidental shooting that was manslaughter is, who got 15 years, and this guy, depraved indifference, if he only gets 12, I mean, what does that say? We're back to square one. Why is that different?
In Minnesota, it's the judge or the jury that actually does the sentencing.
The
judge. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't. It's an interesting question, and I haven't given it much thought either. Like OSHA, I think I may be totally wrong, but my feeling is the lesson is out there. It's done. He was convicted. I don't want to hear about him anymore. I want to move on with accountability and transparency and making systemic changes. If Chauvin, not Chauvin, what's his name?
Chauvin.
Chauvin and Chauvin. If Chauvin rots for the rest of his life, whether he's in or out of prison, I don't care. I don't, I understand Stephen's point though about a comparative story where you'd hate to see some guy who did it accidentally get more time than Chauvin got for purposely murdering Floyd. But it's just not, the sentencing isn't on my mind, and I was surprised when you brought it up, and I don't know if that says something about me or what.
Okay, well, I can't answer the question, but I am going to ask Gary a question. Now, you are a therapist, so I know you can't really just like diagnose this man, but what does it say about a person who would callously, nonchalantly keep their knee on a man's neck until his breath is gone? What does that say about that individual? I mean, is there something in his childhood that, is so deep that maybe we didn't know about? What does that say, do you think?
Yes.
The real thing I think that what we see is there's a culture amongst many people in law enforcement. Now, I want to be careful how I say it because I don't think it's everybody in law enforcement. I don't think everybody goes out to hurt and harm people. I don't think everyone goes out to specifically target Black and brown communities. But let's think about this. The culture that we're dealing with, especially within police, departments. A lot of these guys come into the police department young. They don't know much. I think in Minnesota, I think you can be 18, I believe. The training that you get will vary in the different academies that you attend. So one of my friends was telling me the other day, I don't know how true this is, but that in Minnesota, their training, I think, is only about 4 months. And then they go into, now, I don't know, I can't verify that, I don't know for sure. But the point I'm making is we need to look at the culture, because for Derek Chauvin to do what he did, he obviously thought that it was okay to do that. You and I and everyone in this room knows that it's not okay to do that. but something about the culture that he was representing at that time, the police culture within the Minneapolis Police Department definitely made him feel he could get away with it. And once again, this is not an indictment for every police officer. Obviously, everyone doesn't feel that way. But for him to do, if he didn't think that it was okay for him to rest his knee on Floyd's neck for 9+ minutes, he wouldn't have done it. There would have been some movement. He would have gotten up. But he felt comfortable doing that. And that's an example of organizational culture. The organizational culture within that police department let him know, or sort of impeded, it let him know that if he felt okay. So the real question is, we need to look at the culture of law enforcement. Is this what they're learning? Is this in the training? Is this an application of how they perceive with administering justice? I'm just saying so yeah, a diagnosis you got to do privately and over a span of time, probably, but this is more about the culture of that organization.
Can I ask something about that? That is the culture of the police department much different from the culture of the United States?
No.
I mean, and to me, that's where the problem is.
Bingo.
It's the idea that it's just within the police, or people will add, because I know this, it's more of the statistics on this and the facts of it, that within the military, there's also that same culture. But then when you look at education, medicine, doctors in training, believing to this day that Black people have a higher pain threshold than white people.
Right.
I don't think the problem, I mean, start with policing, because they have a monopoly on the use of violence and of lethal. So I'll just put in one more plug, which is, to me, this gets back to reparations. Almost everything gets back to reparations when it comes to race in this country for me, because we're such a capitalistic society that wealth is the biggest determinant of outcomes all across the board. If you just focus on reparations, that won't do anything with policing. That's true. But if you just focus on policing, you lose sight of a larger picture. And that's why I think reparations, hopefully this case will lead people to debate and look into and accept the need for reparations for all the past harm and continuing harm.
You raise a really good point here, and I want to ask the question. So if we start by reforming police departments, will that lead to a larger reform of society in general? What are your thoughts about that, Steve?
I think it could. I agree with OSHA 100%. It is the police are the tip of the spear, a spear that was created over a 200-year period. It is so ingrained, this what I mentioned before, this predisposition of law enforcement against Black people. But they were built that way. I mean, how did police start in this country? They were responsible for going out and recapturing slaves. That's how it happened. Okay. So, but I do think in order to reform police, you have to reform the infrastructure behind them. So I do think it's like digging into a rock. You gotta dig and dig till you get to the root. And that might be one way. But like OSHA says, that's just in law enforcement, then medicine, and then economic development. It all leads back to the same root, though, which is this epidemic, this cancer of race that we just can't seem to purge out of the society. We say we want to be a multicultural society, but we don't act like we want to be a multicultural society.
Okay. And Gary, I know you have to leave us shortly. I just want to get your last thoughts on what you think about the whole idea of police reform. Does it start there, or do we need to reform society? I mean, can we realistically reform society?
I mean, I think we probably, can we reform society? If we're going to reform society, it's going to have to start on a smaller scale. So it's going to have to start in all those small places. So we probably have to start with policing. And then and as OSHA said, there's so many other areas that we probably would also need to work on as well. So this is not going to be something that's going to just happen overnight. We're talking about, as Steve said, digging in the dirt. We're going to have to literally dig in the places that we need to dig into, and then try to create some kind of gem out of that if it's possible. But policing, we have to look at policing in the sense of, this is historically the way it's been. Historically, policing has not been favorable to African Americans, to Black and brown communities, period. So I think that we got to look at it that way. And how do you change that mindset? How do you go about change? What we saw in the Chauvin trial was something that we don't normally see. We don't normally see police officers or the officers saying that that was wrong. Okay, that's not how we do it. And you're starting to see little snippets of people across the country saying, no, this is how we don't do this. We know the difference between our tasers and our guns. And so we're seeing more of this. Are we seeing enough of it? No, I don't think we're seeing enough of it. But if we're going to start somewhere, I think that would be the start. And that's why I'm saying we have to look at what the culture is. And the culture is a microcosm of the larger culture, but we got to look at what it is. Because if it's okay, if you believe it's okay to do that thing, and if you think it's right to not criticize the person who's doing that thing within that police department, then that's the thing that has to change. So, yeah, I mean, changing the larger society is going to be difficult. I don't know if that can happen. I mean, I think we need to hold hope that it can happen. But I think if it does happen, it has to start on all of those smaller areas that we see. Education, policing, job disparity. We have to look at all of those things. And then, our elections, that's what we see in the past election and with Georgia. And we have to be able to see those things and fight those things almost at the same time. I don't really know what the outcome is going to be.
Kathy, Jerry, I do see you shaking your heads like in agreement. But let me ask you two a question. And Jeb, I'm going to ask you a question. And well, the whites in the panel. First of all, have you ever been stopped by the police?
Boy, that was one of the first questions you asked.
Yeah. Have you ever been stopped?
June.
Yeah, Jerry, have you ever been stopped by the police?
Not without a traffic ticket.
You got a traffic ticket?
Yeah, just a traffic ticket.
Okay, did you get?
Not just.
Okay, so you got stopped for speeding, right?
Right. Yes.
Okay, did you ever fear the police?
I felt threatened. I think police take this authoritarian type view on it. If I don't care, even as a white person, I think I felt a little bit, like, sir, don't step out of the car. In my case, don't step out of the car. Keep your hands on the wheel. Give me your registration and your driver's license only. So they get a little bit pushy, and you follow, what they ask you to do. And you feel like if you don't follow what they do, yes, more serious implications could happen. At least that's how I felt.
Okay, Kathy, and I know I asked you this earlier. You've never been stopped by the police, so.
Sure I have.
Oh,
I've gotten I remember I told you I was called Leadfoot Lokshin growing up. Oh yeah, I got my share of speeding tickets, but I never felt threatened. I never, I was scared because, oh my God, either I had to tell my father or I can't believe I'm getting points on my license, whatever. But I don't remember a policeman saying, keep your hands on the wheel. They would just, and maybe it's because I'm a woman, I don't know. I was more scared because of being stopped than that policeman. But I wanted to mention one thing, if you don't mind, that I wanted to bring up that goes back to this last little conversation. I will keep it very short. There was an incident that happened this past winter where a policeman waterboarded basically a black man. I don't even remember what he did, but he stuck his head in the snow and held it in the snow. And he didn't kill the man or anything. And this policeman was terminated. Now, the issue I have is that he was able to keep his pension, and he could go get a job at any other police department outside of Akron, Ohio. Now, what does that say? And the police department answers to the city. Okay, so what does that say about our city and how they handled that? And I think there's probably a lot of that happening. So
Oh, I agree. I agree with that. Jeb, let me ask you this. Do you think that we can realistically have police reform?
I think I think we have to.
But what having to is one thing, but do you really believe that we can have it?
I gotta fix
there was
this.
There was a case of the culture is so bad that it not only affects white policemen, it also affects black policemen. That's how strong racism is in police departments. That's one point. I mean, there are cases of the one particular one, Kyle Woods, multiple what are they called? The use of force complaints against him. Maybe he's full of self-hatred. I don't know. Targeting black people, responsible for 2 black deaths, was fired. And then, as Kathy just said, hired even after that in another department. That I read something recently that struck me. We used to talk about the bad apples. If we only get rid of the bad apples, then it's going to be okay. What I read recently is the tree is rotten, and once in a while there are good apples on a rotten tree. So, I think that's probably more the case, and it has to do with recruitment, where these people are coming from, screening out previous offenders, all of that stuff. But I have to underline what OSHA said. We can work in all these different areas, in schools and in jobs and in bank loans for buying property anywhere people want to buy property, all of that stuff. Take off the red lines. The one message this country can give to everybody would be with reparations. That's the first message. That's what will say, okay, we, as a very basic message, we live in a racist country. It was founded on racism. It grew rich because of racism. Now we have to change the equation. And you do that with reparations. That's the first message. And that will make all of those smaller segments easier to reform.
Michael?
Well, I'm reminded that yesterday in Los Angeles, a white lady called the police, and the police came. But a black man her next door neighbor was a black man, and he was emptying his trash. The police immediately got out the car, and who do you think they went after? It was right after the black man, and had him on the ground and in handcuffs. And his girlfriend came out. We would have never heard of this if he hadn't been a producer, but he was a record producer, a music producer. And his girlfriend came out with just her robe, and before you know it, her robe was open, struggling with the police to turn him loose. It took the girl from next door saying, "You got the wrong guy." But we would have never heard of any of it if this guy hadn't been a producer. But someone said earlier today, I don't know who said it, but they said, I agree with OSHA about reparations. All of this has to start. I agree very much with most of what has been said today. But one of the things that I think that with the police, that we shouldn't ever forget that America is a violent country, and that we incarcerate people, and statistics prove that we incarcerate Black people way more than we incarcerate anyone else. But we have a high rate of incarceration that's actually embarrassing. We are such a violent society that violence is almost okay. You look at the way just in the last couple of weeks, the people that have been killed with guns, it's embarrassing to me. It's heartbreaking. You know, the very next day after the trial, I spent the next day, I was sad the entire day. I was sad because I felt like, this is not going to solve the problem. The problem is deep. It's very deep. And I want one thing, it's not been 200 years, it's been 400 years, you know, since they brought the first slave over. God, honestly, we need to deal with that. And we have to, in my community, the city has started a racial, they got people talking, they started a committee and they got people talking about race and being honest in that conversation. Until we're honest in the conversation, you know, I look at Trump and the damage he did to this country, and I can't overlook that. And he brought out all these racial issues that basically have been hidden. But there's too much hatred, there's too much anger, you know, in this country. We need to deal with that. And people need to be able to talk to your neighbors and talk to your you know, let's be honest about race. If we can at least be honest about race, we can start solving the problem. When you guys were talking, I remember when my children were little, I moved into a neighborhood that was basically all white. I was pushing my son in a stroller down the street, and the white lady saw me, and she was my neighbor actually. But when she saw me coming with my son down the street, I'm a man with a baby in a stroller, she crossed the street because she did not. I don't know whether she didn't want to speak to me or she feared me. And when it comes to violence, and if you're going to be honest, white people have been a lot more violent against Black people than Black have been against whites.
All right, let me ask this question, Michael. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it, but we're going to keep moving because we only have a little bit of time left.
Okay.
Bruce and Brooks, let me ask this question. And I ask everybody, but I want Bruce to address it first, because Michael brought up something about not being able to be honest about race. Why can't we be honest about the racial divide in this country? Why can't we be honest about it? What is the problem of us?
Because some people make it political. And once the politics jump in, I watch a lot of Fox, and all the Black folk that are parading in front of the camera, because they've reached a certain status in life, they will say it doesn't apply to them until it does. It's just like all crimes or all situations. COVID-19. Oh, COVID is a hoax until it happens to you. So that's what we're dealing with. 2 books. I mean, I have a Zoom call I was on 3 weeks ago with guys and women from my old neighborhood, Brooklyn, New York, and that are career law enforcement. And they said something that was very profound. And that was, when you're in a situation and it's you or them, forget about the training, because these people that are coming into law enforcement, they're coming in after they've been 20, 21 years of life, 22, 23 years of life. So all of the biases have been built up from elementary school, middle school, high school, college. Now they're out in this training, however long the training is in law enforcement. Now you're supposed to forget all that you grew up with and were told and change who you are because of a training.
Right.
Not happening. And that came from police officers, Black police officers, male, female, that said their bias Everyone's biased, and they have to come in with a mindset to change that. And if you don't, you're not going to have change. We can do all the reform. We can't legislate what people think and what they believe.
Okay. So Brooks,
Right.
let me ask you this. Oh, yeah, hold on, Osha. Brooks, why can't white people be honest about the racism?
Because it's their fault. And because they would have to admit that all their privilege, exists. Unearned privilege that exists as white people. They have to admit where that came from and what that means to the people who don't have it. And they can't face that ugliness. They can't face that loss of status. They can't face realizing that the story that they tell themselves their whole lives is based on a lie. A brutal, cruel, deliberately cruel lie. And when I was a little boy, I'm 63 years old coming up. I've said this before. I was raised to believe that, when I heard you can be anything you want, I knew that message was directed directly at me. Because all the presidents looked like me. And to this day, all but one looked like me. And when I was little, until the 70s, all the astronauts looked like me. All the doctors they all looked like me. And I was just assumed that was sort of natural. But at the same time, I knew that was a lie, because I knew that when they found out what I really was, which was the worst thing possible, that I would lose all that. That would be taken away because I knew, the brutality that was behind that facade. By just listening, I always felt like a spy. Growing up a little gay boy, I was moving in circles that were dangerous, and so I knew how dangerous it was. And white people can't hear the word privilege without thinking they're going to take away my status. Well, your status is not deserved. So yeah, you need to be taken down a notch or two.
Okay.
And,
okay. Okay. Osha, let me let you jump in here, and then Kathy and Jerry, I want to ask you the same question.
Well, first, I wanted to thank Michael for sharing his experience in that town, walking with his child. And I really felt what you were saying and the effect on you and how unfair that is. And I know that happens all the time. Bev, when you asked the question the first time, your question was, why can't we talk about race honestly? And then when you went to Brooks, you said, why can't white people talk about race? Which kind of preempted what I was going to say, which was, who's the we in this conversation who can't talk about race? But I mean that as an honest question. Not being Black, my experience is with white people not being able to talk about race. And when I'm talking with somebody who's Black about race, they're obviously talking about race. And my impression is that white people have a problem talking about race far more than Black people have that problem. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so. I definitely would think so. Jerry and Kathy, what are your thoughts? Why can't white people talk about racism?
I think mainly it's because our leadership and our parties, and right now you got a division as far as the news that is heard between the MSNBC culture and the Fox culture. I think fear sells in this country politics. I think that's our biggest thing. Our adversary is in politics. These politicians run on the fear factor. Trump did it remarkably well. And I think that's a really good, we got to overcome that. Now, saying that, I see role models within the Black community, and it's encouraging to see them both in commercials, on TV shows, in our leadership. There's a lot of encouraging signs, and you know, you know, as you know, like I say, in presidency before you only had white men. Now you had Obama, you know, came on in, and that's unbelievably a great role model for all Black men. You know, now you got Kamala Harris.
But why can't he be a great role model for all men? Why does
Well,
it just
he
have to
is
be
for
Black
me.
men?
He's an unbelievable.
Why was the response to Obama Trump?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There
fear
you go.
factor, and that was the fear factor. Listen, I see that 50%, and I don't know, maybe it's close to 50% of this, you know, in my mind, this country, you know, they want a democracy, but they want a caste system democracy.
Yes.
That has to be broken. You know, that's what the way they want. They want, yeah, I want democracy, but, you know, I'm still a little bit better than you.
Mm-hmm. There it is right there. I think that's it right there. Just exactly what it is.
Yep.
One of the things I said one time on Facebook, and I thought I broke the internet, was because the reaction I got. I said the reality is that Jefferson and Trump are the same guy. Both womenizers, both racists, both capitalist monsters.
His name just came up.
And for this country to accept that mentality has existed for 250 years, it will crack it. It will crack it. And just like he says, we don't really want a multicultural democracy. We say we do, but we really don't. And we have never been honest, particularly white Americans have never been honest about that. That Jefferson was lying the whole time he wrote this incredible Constitution, and then he spent the rest of his life violating it. And we've not been honest about that. And until we're honest about that, we are never going to have the multicultural democracy that we say we want to have.
Jeb, you want to chime in on that, Jeb?
Yeah, I have a hard time going back in history and condemning men and women for the choices they made 250 years ago. I don't have any problem, Stephen, with you saying that today they were dead wrong, because I think about in 200 years, our great-great-grandchildren are going to look back at us and say, I can't believe they ate meat and what that does. I mean, and a million other criticisms.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, you know, we live in our time, we do the best in our time. Somebody said something a little while ago about not being able to legislate changes in attitudes. And that's true, but you think about what happened in the 60s with the Voting Rights Act. And I've got another one for you. You want to reform police? Instead of paying the settlements, you know, for every Chauvin trial, there are 40 or 50 settlements in civil rights trials, sorry. When after the policeman has been, you know, let off, the family brings a civil trial, which is much easier to prove. And those settlements, and there are millions, tens of millions of dollars a year forked out in cities to families of Black people who've been killed by cops. Instead of making the taxpayers pay, take it out of the policeman's pension fund. Then you get other cops saying, whoa, that's going to really affect my outcome. I got to be careful of this guy because he's got a record, et cetera. You can see the repercussions of doing that.
Exactly. I've always wondered, how can they afford to keep paying these settlements? It's because they're paying these settlements.
We're paying it.
Yeah, taxpayers.
Right.
Go ahead, Kathy. Yes.
Yeah. So I think I've mentioned this before, and I'm curious about other communities. In our community in Akron, we started a racial equity and social justice task force that's made up, I believe, of 9 different committees. It's headed by a very popular, well-known Black bishop from a church that I've been working with. called the House of the Lord. And, you know, there's criminal justice. I happen to be on the communications committee, Bev. I think of you every time, and how we can get communications from the community as well as give information out to the communities. But there's all these different committees who meet once a month. It's a 5-year plan. It's made up of every color of our community and leadership and people like me who, you know, are just interested in being part of it. And I mean, there were 29 people on the task force, and then I'm even on a subcommittee. I'm hoping change is going to occur. I know it's not going to happen overnight. This is it's a 5-year process. I mean, the first reporting is happening next week. Are other communities doing this? Do you think what we're doing is going to make a difference? Or what is going to make a difference? You know, and one other thing, you talked about reparations, and the first thing that came to my mind is about the Holocaust, being Jewish. The Germany started reparations back in the, I'm going to say 70s and 80s.
50s.
And invited, what?
It was in the 50s.
In the 50s, and started inviting Jewish survivors and their families back to Germany free. Come visit us. Let us say we're sorry. We didn't do this. We're ashamed of this. You know, come see us, kind of thing. Could that happen in such a way, you know, with the Black communities? I don't know, but it did happen in Germany.
And can I just add that
Native Americans would ask, we would have to take care of them first.
in Germany, when reparations began, less than 30% of Germans agreed to it. It was a decision that was made by the leadership, but there was you have to have buy-in by a certain percentage, but it's not 51%. And we have now something like 25 to 26% of Americans in favor of reparations. So it's not as far off as some people like to present. It is very much a possibility to have that happen using the German model of how that happened.
Do you think it worked in Germany? Did it work?
Well, it depends on
Relations.
It depends on what you mean by work. As far as giving money as a form of redress to injured parties, to some extent, yes, it did. And I've been to Germany several times since then. And as a Jew, the first time I went was kind of nerve-wracking because I had grown up in the shadow of the Holocaust. But I was so impressed to see they had a denazification program that was amazing. And just looking through channels on TV in Germany at my hotel at night when I was done interviewing, there was something about the Holocaust every night on at least one channel. And I know there's still problems there, but we never deconfederized the United States after the Civil War.
True.
And that is the equivalent of denazification in Germany. And I know William Darity, who's an economist at Duke, who wrote the book on reparations, talks now a lot about deconfederation as being a prelude to reparations. And during the George Floyd protests, tearing down Confederate monuments, renaming military bases, taking away the names of Confederate generals from those, is a beginning of deconfederation that needs to continue to unwarp our warped history. Yeah.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Real quick with reparations, you know, the one thing that when I hear that, the one thing that I think, if we're going to do reparations, it has to begin, and I think Jeb mentioned this or someone mentioned it earlier, Reparations to me means rebuilding the communities that have been torn down, that were demolished, that have been neglected. You want to do reparations for the Black community? Let's rebuild the Black community. Literally, build the economic structure. That's reparations, because if you give out a handful of money to folks and they have no education and know what to do with it, it's going to be like these athletes that I've dealt with that come out of college and given millions of dollars and do not know what to do with it. They're not going to better themselves if you give out a boatload of cash. You've got to build the infrastructure so that they can be vibrant. Jobs, community, shopping, prosperous communities. What was done in the 20s, where we don't even talk about the Black communities that were vibrant, even during the Jim Crow era.
Right.
That's right.
What we have to do. That's true reparations.
That's
I
right.
agree.
I
I like
totally
that.
agree. I like that too. All right, last question. We got to wrap it up. We went a little bit over time, but I thank you because this has just been a really good, engaging discussion today. Last question for each of you. Will the Chauvin verdict eventually change the way policing is done? Will the verdict we got this week change the way policing is done in this country?
Over 20 years. Over 20 years, yes.
Well, let's start with you then, Bruce. Go right ahead. You jump right in. Go ahead.
Over a 20-year period, yes. It's going to be slow, just like it took this long for it to come to light. It's going to take this long to change it.
So you're saying in 20 years approximately?
Or more.
Or more. Okay. Michael, what do you think?
I think he's right. I think it's going to take that much time, unfortunately. And I wish it was a magic and it would just happen in a lot less time, but I think it's going to take.
Okay, well, go. I want to ask this question of you. So you think that we're still going to see white police officers killing Black people, because they feared for their lives or whatever? This is going to continue.
Yes, I think it's going to continue. Well, listen, right here in North Carolina, it happened the other day, right after the verdict. And what amazed me about that was the Charlotte has the largest newspaper in the state. It didn't even cover it. It wasn't even mentioned in the Charlotte Observer.
Really?
Are you
Yeah, of course
serious?
I called them and I told them that, and I told them that was shameful that you didn't even mention it. And then finally the TV station picked up. But wait a minute, before I get to this, I got another question. How many McKinley Bulldogs is on this thing? I'm a McKinley Bulldog. How many McKinley Bulldogs are actually here?
Proud of it. Proud of it.
The red and black
me
forever.
Too. Very proud of it. Very proud of it. Yes.
I wear the red and black forever.
Forever.
Okay.
Forever. That's right.
I went from red and black to red and gray, scarlet and gray. Okay.
All right, we're going down a rabbit hole here. Let's go.
Could I answer? I think
Yes, go ahead.
if we applied what Jeb was saying about taxing the pensions, and if we remove qualified immunity, it would warp speed the change. We're a capitalist society, and until there is an economic impact,
Right, that's true.
for behaviors, we can talk until the sun goes down. So you got to hurt them in the pocket, and people go, "Oh, this doesn't make any sense anymore."
Right. That's right.
That's
That's
how
right.
it
That's
works.
what happened with the buses in Montgomery.
Exactly.
That to start making the change.
Yeah.
And
you
I
gotta,
do
move,
agree
you gotta
with
make
that.
it hurt
I have much
financially.
quicker if you start hitting them in the pocket. If we start taking
Right.
them pensions away, then guess what? You'll start seeing change.
Exactly.
All right, Kathy and Jerry, what are
Yeah,
your thoughts?
So he's writing something down. The one thing I wanted to mention, besides, yes, it's going to take a long time for reform and change, but how do you feel about Merrick Garland starting an investigation of the police department in Minneapolis? And shouldn't that happen across the country. And I think we might see more change because of that
Right.
than we are within the police and the police departments. I think they're going to be under so much more scrutiny and under the pressure to reform, to change the way they train their cops and who they hire and what it looks like, and using body cams and not being able to shut them off. And, you know, all that oversight, I think, is going to make a bigger difference than a cop killing another Black person. Jerry.
All right, Jerry, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think definitely change will happen if you continue to have a national focus on it. That's number one. Number two is I think the immunity factor is critical. I think you gotta get rid of the immunity. I think you gotta get rid of the immunity even in Washington. I think it's kind of crazy, okay, that these politicians can say anything they want, you know, when we're in the halls of Congress, yet they couldn't say that same rhetoric, you know, in a courtroom. They'd get, you know, they'd be put for perjury. You know, I think that's just kind of craziness. Enough with this immunity factor. The other factor is the current Biden administration and the current, you know, Department of Justice. Obviously, the Trump under Barr was incredibly corrupt. You know, it was, you know, something, you know, to try and get, you know, and I think Barr finally stepped down a little bit, which was nice to see, you know, but I think, you know, having Garland on, I think you're going to get a much fairer Department of Justice, and I think they will go after it, much like the Obama Department of Justice did. So, you know, and that takes us, we got to get back to better politicians, both on our local and our state, because right now our states are really taken over by Republicans, and this is just criminal activity that these guys are doing. Incredible.
Yes. Jeb, what are your thoughts?
I think this will be a marker in the book of tracing from a Black experience in America from the first slave to total equality, you know, off in the future someday. This will be a marker. This may even be a chapter. But it's, you know, is it going to change policing? Yeah, somewhat. It'll be one case among many. Some of it have already happened, and I'm afraid there are many more to come. Kathy asked one thing that gives me some hope, which is organizations like you were talking about, Kathy, that are starting up. We don't have one of those in my little, very white county in the mountains of North Carolina, but since George Floyd's murder, since BLM started back in 2016, but mostly since the murder over the last year, our membership in the NAACP has doubled in our chapter over the last year. And I think there's something happening with allies where Black people are not standing up alone anymore.
True.
They never have been completely alone, but I think we as allies are much more widely spread, and our eyes have been opened a little bit, and I think a lot more can happen, but I think the equation is changing because of that.
Osha?
Well, my view of a question like that about, you know, will this make change soon? And then the idea that it's, well, maybe not soon, 20 years or something. It's like the bus boycott that Michael or someone brought up, that actually, yeah, it seemed like that happened quickly, but there was over 100 years of protests against segregation and public accommodations that led up to that. And we tend to look at our history as the way it's taught is usually with these one moment incidents without looking at everything, the struggles that have gone on for 100, 200 years, 250 years before it. So Black people have been fighting against white oppression by the police or whatever form it took since 1619. And I think when changes happen in America, they tend to happen very quickly. If you look at where you are one day and where you are a few days later or a year later, because we only look at that 1 year. But there's a whole history leading up. So I would be neither surprised nor not surprised, not surprised if there's major change that comes up. But it isn't just because of what happened with George Floyd. It's what's happened over the last 200 years. And the struggle is invisible to most white people. And so it might appear to be fast. So it might not be 20 years because it's already been 200 and some years.
Steve, what do you say?
I have to agree with him. And with Jeb, I think there has to be a financial burden in order to turbocharge the change. I think that's how America works. I also agree that the Black Lives Matter had a lot of young white Americans involved, and that mattered. That really did matter. Mm-hmm. So it's no one silver bullet. All of these things have to happen in a sequence. I think what we're missing right now is that the civil rights movement was far more organized than we give it credit. These people are strategic in so many different ways. And when we look back at it, we kind of take it for granted. I would love to see that organizations like Black Lives Matter, when they're doing that, they be more organized like that. There was a reason behind peaceful protests and not burning buildings and destroying property. And these young people have kind of gleaned off the top of this, but don't really understand that they get the icing, but they don't really get the cake. That there was a reason that the sit-ins were so organized, that what John Lewis and them did was so strategic. So if the activists can get more organized like that and put a financial component to it, I think we can speed change up. I really do.
All right, and Brooks?
I want to say like 9 things all at one time. I'm going to try and do it sequentially. I'm reminded of, I think it's Hemingway said something talking about going bankrupt. It's slowly at first and then all at once. If you've ever driven or piloted a big boat, I've done it a few times studying whales, you turn, your first mistake you make, you turn and nothing happens. You turn and nothing happens. You turn and nothing happens. And then all of a sudden, oh my God, you're swinging around really fast. So this has given me a modicum of hope, which is uncharacteristic for me, that it could be emblematic of change coming up. There's, we're changing 1,000, the direction of 1,000 ships at one time, trying to, and the tremendous amount of horrible inertia that's built up into that. And so I think it's possible, here's hope, that we're going to start seeing these changes happening a lot more quickly than we're used to them happening. I mean, we've been talking about this my whole life. Mm-hmm. Right? And most of the people on this panel, this esteemed host, our whole lives, we've been talking about this. And, our parents, y'all's parents and parents talked about this in a different way from my parents talked about it, if they talked about it at all. That's kind of the abusers don't talk about abuse. The abused talk about abuse. White people don't talk about racism. Black people talk about racism. So, but more and more white people are talking about it openly and honestly. Not anywhere near enough, but more than did even 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So I think it's maybe one ship in that armada that's starting to turn a little bit. But how long it's going to take, I don't know.
Okay, well, with that being said, that is going to end this conversation on racism in America, talking about the George Floyd case, the guilty verdict for Derek Chauvin, and where we go here with police reform. On behalf of Jeb, Brooks, Stephen, Michael, Osha, Kathy, Jerry, and Bruce, I want to thank you all for watching this particular episode, and remember to stay empowered along your own journey. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Bev. Thank you all.
Good news you can use for your life. If you want to get the info that'll help